Welcome to Carrie O'Toole Ministries. I am not Carrie O'Toole, by the way. This is Carrie O'Toole, and this is Carrie O'Toole Ministries with the Broken and Brilliant podcast, where we interview people with stories of brokenness that have turned to brilliance and share how God has moved in lives. And so today, I'm not the usual host. I'm usually the co-host, but today I am going to be the host, and I'm going to introduce you to Carrie O'Toole. Hi. Because Carrie has just written a book, and she's just released a book, and it's just such an amazing story of God's hand in her life, and it's time to share and talk about it, and I'm really excited for this.
Well, it's interesting because normally I'm kind of in your seat and you're in my seat, and we're switching roles today, so yes. Cool.
Okay, so your book is called Relinquished, When Love Means Letting Go.
Yes.
So what does that mean, relinquished? When love means letting go.
Well, it's both a legal term and it's a heart thing. Mm-hmm. You know, if you think of the word relinquished, in the adoption triad, we call it an adoption triad because usually there is a birth mom, there is a child, and there's an adoptive family. In my case, I've been on all different sides of adoption because I grew up with an adopted brother, so we were the adoptive family. Then when our oldest son, Brendan, was born, we were at the hospital when he was born, so I was an adoptive mother again. And then I was the adoptive mother of our son, who in our book I'm calling Sam, to protect his identity. And, I just want to give him privacy and not invade his life space any further. But I was the adoptive mom of Sam when he was 3.5 from an orphanage in Vietnam. And then, we'll talk about the story here in a little bit, but relinquished means the family who severs their rights as a parent. Yeah. You relinquish in the court. And that's how our book starts, is in the courtroom with the judge asking, is this what you're saying? Yeah. You are surrendering your rights as a parent.
Wow. So this started with a heart for adoption, a heart that was following the prompting of being a family to welcome in another child to raise who needed love and needed a family.
Right. And, that was always my heart. From the time I was a little girl, people would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, other than my standard, which was I wanted to be a monkey trainer in the circus.
Nice.
Not sure where that
It's not too late. It's not too late.
One day. I still go to the zoo. Brendan and I went to the zoo not too long ago, and it's like, we got to go to the monkeys. That's my favorite place. I used to think I wanted a little monkey in the house, but I've seen what they do, and really not so much anymore. But anyway, my dream was to be a mom. A lot of people have career dreams, and my dreams have changed over the years, and I have had careers, but my dream was to be a mom. Yeah. I just loved. It's funny because I didn't really always love other people's kids. That may sound awful, but I'm not like the nursery worker. Right. I'm not the one to do daycare, but I loved my own kids. Yeah. And I really, we wanted to have kids. I wanted to be a mom.
So you did it. You decided as a family that you were going to adopt from Thailand?
Vietnam.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then, so how did that process begin?
Well, it was interesting because it was about a 9-month process, which is just like having a baby. Yeah. And so we kind of were thinking that we wanted to have a little bit older child because at the time Brendan and Katie were 7 and 8, and I was actually in a career. I was working with Pampered Chef at the time. I had just become an executive director, which it's a direct sales company. There were, I don't know how many at the time. There were about 70,000 in the company, but there were only 65 or 70 executive directors.
So it's kind of a big deal.
It was a big deal.
Yes, it was.
I had a large downline. I was training a lot. I was doing a lot and loved the leadership part of it. I absolutely loved it. So when we started talking about adopting again, I was like, I don't really... First of all, we had troubles with infertility, and I just didn't even want to think about having to go through that again. It would have ripped us apart. It was just way too difficult. So adoption came up again, and we were thinking, I don't want to really start with the baby phase because that's so difficult. And with the career going and the kids were great, we were thinking, what if we adopted a little bit older child, they could then play together. You know, they'd all have kind of the same interests and be somewhat similar and all of that. That was the hope.
Yes. So you went to Vietnam?
We did. Actually, what had happened, this was kind of interesting. They had actually sent us, the way that it works, this orphanage was run by Catholic nuns in Vietnam. And so there's some interesting stuff about that, just the whole history of Catholicism in Vietnam and everything. There's a little bit of, I can't remember the word for it, when they kind of mix cultures a little bit within the church. There's some interesting little things that go on. But anyway, these nuns separate themselves out and go into a room, and they pray about when a family says that they want to adopt, and they pray until they're in a unanimous decision about who the child is for that family. And so, you know, at the time, my faith was not very strong. I went to church diligently, but that was it. I did not hear from God. I did not know how to hear his voice. I actually went to a pastor at our church once begging him to help me hear God's voice. And he promised me that moment I would hear God's voice if we just were quiet together. Well, I came out the biggest failure in the world because I did not. Yeah, crickets, and that was it. I was done for. So I was not in a great place with that. But I did believe God. I just didn't know him very well. So anyway, we trusted them. The first picture that they sent was of a little boy who was only 2. And I literally said, I'm not going to look at the picture because I don't want to reject a child. But that's just too young. We had asked for 5, 4 or 5. So we waited a couple of months, and then they sent us another picture, and this boy was 3. And it's like, oh, what do we do? You know, and I'm feeling like, okay, these nuns are praying. They know God better than I do.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, we got this picture, and finally we said, you know what, if we could wait a few more months and they may send us a 4-year-old, by that time he's going to be, you know,
closer to the age that you're looking for.
Yeah. So if it is our child, we want to get him out as fast as possible. So we decided that we were going to go for this one. And so we got pictures and, you know, started thinking about names and started planning the trip. And it was just a very, very crazy time because there's a ton of paperwork. And we had already been through one domestic adoption, but the paperwork required for an international adoption is just crazy. You have to get everything certified and a seal from the Secretary of State and, you know, all these different things through the state. And you keep having to get this paper, but it has to be done through 3 different offices and it has to have this stamp and that stamp. And so it wasn't really difficult, but it was just time consuming, a lot of running around and getting things translated and things like that. Kind of crazy.
Yeah. So you finally got everything in order. Everything's filled out, ready to go. And your family goes as a family.
We went.
All went.
We actually in Vietnam. They have a law now. I don't know what it's like now, but when we went back in 2000, there was a law that you had to go twice, and the same person had to be in the country separated by 6 weeks of departure. And the reason for that was they had had trouble with baby selling. People were coming in and they would say they're going to adopt, and they'd take a child out of the country and then sell the child.
Oh, geez.
And so they were making it difficult for adoptive families. And they want to know, are you willing to go through this and are you willing to go through that? We're going to make it hard for you. So, our whole family traveled over the first time.
Wow.
And then I ended up going back with my mom and my brother, who was adopted from Vietnam as well, 6 weeks later to bring him home.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. So you brought him home. What happened after that?
Well, it's hard to remember some because I started having sleep problems like right after we got home. In fact, they started while we were there. And I think part of it was that we had 2 trips. It's a 14-hour time difference. And I went twice within 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And so my body just couldn't handle it. Plus, this little boy, he would wake up in the middle of the night terrified, like night after night after night, and he was up at 3 a.m. So we had a 40-hour journey to get there, and the first time we had a little bit of time kind of to rest up a little. This time, literally, we had been here for 20 minutes, and they took us to the orphanage, picked him up, signed the papers, spent 6 hours doing all this stuff, dropped him off with us at our apartment or our hotel where we were staying, and that was it. So there was no time to rest or anything, and he was in trauma.
Yeah.
So we were just,
you were in a new country, outside of your element, taking a child.
Right.
He
with no
sleep. He was a child being taken from his community, everything he knew. Yes.
And what we really came to understand was they don't treat kids the way that they do here. I mean, here we would try to explain, we would comfort, we would, do whatever we could to reduce the trauma on this child. We kept asking the first trip, would you please tell him we're leaving and we'll come back? And they'd say, he's just a child. And no one would tell him.
Right.
So we don't know what he knew.
Wow. And if you think about how many other people maybe had shown an interest in him, come and gone, he's kind of like...
Yeah, and we don't know whether that happened or not. He had a couple of physical issues that we think maybe that's why he was still there. Because a lot of times if there was a baby with no imperfections, that's what most people are looking for. And so we thought, well, we can handle a few issues. It's not that big of a deal.
So you're here and you're home and trying to settle into the flow of life again. You have 2 other children, older children, and just integrating this new child into your family. Tell us about
it was wild. It was filled at the beginning with doctor appointments and evaluations and just things like this. And I mean, there were many, many doctors. We didn't know whether there had been any immunizations, so they basically started from scratch. He had some dental issues that needed to be addressed. So I think he had 2 surgeries within his first year, one within about 6 weeks, because all of his teeth, a lot of them were broken, and he had cavities, and he needed 8 crowns, he needed fillings.
Wow.
His teeth, the nerves were exposed. So when we first got home, they didn't refrigerate a lot of the food there, so we didn't notice this till we got home. But I would give him fruit, and he would just, the nerves in his teeth. So we took him to the dentist.
That makes my heart hurt.
I know. We took him to the dentist, and he flipped at the dentist's office, and I couldn't figure out at first because we had been to several other doctors, and he was fine. I mean, he cried if there was a shot. I don't mean that he was just fine. He was a little child who was afraid, but the dentist was particularly overwhelming to him, and the minute we walked into the office, he started screaming and trying to get away, and we couldn't figure out what that was about. And the dentist said he was missing a tooth, and the dentist said, I bet you that somebody pulled that tooth with no Novocaine. And the smell from this office, he's reminded of what happened.
Oh, wow.
So she said, you know what, I'm not even going to examine. She took one quick peek in his mouth and said, it's a mess. She said, I'm not even going to try and clean him or examine him because it's too traumatic. So we scheduled a time, and she did a 3-hour surgery that included cleaning, filling the cavities, crowning, capping the crowns, deadening nerves, all of that kind of stuff. And 3 hours at a hospital under general anesthetic to do a dental thing.
Wow.
Mainly because some of it really he needed to be out for it, but some of it was just to calm him so he wasn't so afraid.
Yeah. Wow. So those were
that's like one experience at the beginning. It was all these different doctors and finding out what the physical limitations and things that needed to be dealt with were. And then after that, it was kind of starting to figure out, okay, school, what are we going to do? Got him at 3.5, started preschool later. This was like right over Christmas. And then I think 4th quarter, we started preschool. And did some testing. He had been with us maybe 3 or 4 months. And so the language was not there at all. Well, I shouldn't say it all. He had a few words, and he could understand a few things that we were saying. But so they were trying to get an evaluation of his skill level, and I mean, it was just amazing because we learned so many things. When kids are kept in a crib I think basically he was in a crib till he was about 2. We didn't know that till we got over there and saw the other babies. They've got 2-year-olds in cribs. It's like, what are they doing in cribs? But they couldn't contain them.
Yeah.
So it was kind of more out of just necessity for taking care of them. They were fed, but we learned that he didn't really understand spatial relations. So things like walking up and down the steps, he never walked up with one step, then the other, then the other. It would always be left, right, left, right, left, right. So we had to teach him how to do that. He didn't know how to slide or to swing. He couldn't pedal. He didn't know how to do any of these things. And so when they were doing the testing, they took 2 blocks and put 2 next to each other and stacked one on top and wanted him to do the same. And he couldn't figure it out. And I said, what is that? And they said, when you learn spatial relations from crawling, from being on top of, from being under, next to, he didn't learn it. I'm like, things that we just assume everybody picks up, you don't even realize they're learned, behavior. So that was very interesting to me, to find these things that playing by yourself. I didn't know that kids don't know how to do that.
Right.
So he didn't pick up on a lot of these things. So it was very interesting. I remember thinking, if you brought home a newborn, you'd be carrying them around all the time. Well, I ended up carrying around a 35-pounder, for months and months and trying to teach kind of as a baby.
Yeah.
So it was very different.
So all these
from what
new
I thought.
things that probably were not discussed much before the process.
No.
But when did you start realizing that, wow, something's serious here, something's not right? We're doing all these things, we're helping, we're supporting, we're encouraging, but something's not working.
I think we knew there were some things even from when we first saw him in Vietnam. There were some red flags. I talk about a lot of those in the book, but so much of it we just kept believing, and I think this is a myth that a lot of adoptive foster parents believe, that love is enough, that if you just love them enough, everything will be okay. And what I'm coming to discover, even since the book's come out, is it's not just adoptive families. We're talking about parenting traumatized children.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I understood that at the beginning. It was not spelled out specifically enough. We did not, and even if they did say it a little bit, they did not emphasize it to the point that it needed to be emphasized, that these children are traumatized. They have been wounded deeply. This is not just a little, if you love them enough, it will be okay. These children have PTSD. They have lots of different, so many of them. They're going to have physical issues because they were not cared for in the way that they needed to and nourished in the way that they needed to, both before they were born and the first few years of their lives. They didn't have, they need physical therapy, they need OT, they need all these different things. There are spiritual issues going on. There are emotional and psychological issues going on. And when you don't know the history of the birth mom and what her physical or emotional condition may have been, there may be some genetic things that you're not going to have any awareness of. So we had some training, and sometimes I think back and I've asked my husband, it's like, did they actually tell us some of this and we were just too in la la land to hear it, or did they not say this? And he said, we both talked about it. It's like, I think they said a little bit, but nowhere near what we needed to be prepared. I think so many times there's such a thing for adoption agencies in particular, churches in particular, they want to get kids into homes. Wonderful thought. And I'm all for it. I mean, I'm very pro-adoption. I'm pro-foster care. I'm pro all of this. But the problems come in when you don't disclose fully, when you don't help prepare these families in the way that they need to be prepared. We were not prepared to take a super traumatized child who could not form an attachment. And yet we believed we were.
Yeah.
And so we tried. We did everything we could possibly do. I mean, oh my goodness, we tried. My life for 8 years, I quit my job. we moved several times trying to make things better. We sought out the best school environment. We got therapy. We paid. There were times where we were paying more than our house payment in therapy bills every month, and it would last for over a year.
Yeah.
Where this was going on. And at other times, maybe it wasn't the whole mortgage that we were paying, but it was never nothing. We were constantly in therapy, seeking out specialists and trying to find the very best that we could find. And don't hear this as, this is not an arrogant or a pride statement. We weren't going through the system. My husband had a good job. We had some insurance, but a lot of times what we needed, we knew would not be covered by insurance. And thankfully we had the money. And sometimes I think, I don't know what people who don't have the money would do.
Right. Right.
Because we were able to just...
You had all the resources.
Yeah.
You had all the resources.
Well, and so they were not enough.
Was there any support from any sort of adoption services that help families who could be struggling in this?
Not that we found. And I'm finding that I'm continuing to research this. And there are more and more becoming available. Here's what's interesting to me. Adoption has always been around since as long as humans have been around because things happen. Yeah. Children are left without a home. So a lot of times it will be a family member who takes them in. Over the years, though, as foster care, the numbers have gone. I mean, there's something like 400,000 children in foster care right now. And it's a ton, right now. And there are kids being placed every day, and there are kids aging out every day. Adoption, international adoption, has become very large over the last several years, the last decade in particular, maybe 15 years. But until that time, we had not studied the effects of this. We didn't understand what would happen to these kids, what would happen to the families as they took them in. And for the most part, I think, with some struggles and some little issues here and there, it can work out pretty well. Yeah. And it may not be the ideal, but when trauma strikes, when tragedy strikes, we can make this work, and it can become a blessing to everyone involved. Absolutely. Right. But what we're discovering is the kids who have suffered severe trauma, there is something deeply, deeply broken inside. And what ends up happening is they don't trust, because everything in their life has been taken from them. They've watched sometimes horrors, they've watched tragedies, they've experienced abuse or neglect or whatever it may be. And so they don't trust. They don't develop empathy when that happens because they're very guarded. And sometimes then they end up not developing consciences as well. And I'm seeing this as becoming like a national epidemic. And I don't believe that I'm just blowing this up. Right. I mean, every time that there is something that goes on in the national news where there's a shooting or there's something, they always look at, there's gun control, there's pro-gun control, there's all these political things that go on. Right. My mind immediately goes to, was there trauma in early childhood? Did they attach? Yeah. Were they able to develop empathy and learn how to trust? And so my book, I wrote it kind of as therapy for me. It was sort of, it started coming out and I had to write it. Right. But then as it's come out, I'm getting emails from people that I don't know. And the first wave of people who are picking this up is other moms who have been through what we've been through. And they feel very alone and very isolated, and there's a lot of shame. Because, we didn't talk about this, but the story of Relinquished is that after 8 years, we ended up relinquishing our son to another family. The most heartbreaking decision of our lives, knowing this is just not going to go over well. Yeah. And it didn't. We were judged harshly and continue to be in some ways. But the way that we saw it at the end there was our families falling apart. my physical and emotional and psychological health were at risk. I was not doing well. My marriage was about to crumble. We were losing our other children as well. And we weren't helping this child.
Right.
What do you do when everything you try is not enough?
Right.
He was still suffering.
Right.
We were not healing this child. And that's all we ever wanted for him, was to heal him. And this other family stepped in, and he was doing better with them. And I mean, the realization that your own child may do better in another family.
It's heartbreaking.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, we've been judged as, oh, you're pawning your kid off, or you just don't do that. Well, what if the only way for this child to make it? What if the only way for you to make it? What if the only way for your family to remain intact is to allow him to join another family?
Right. And you're not talking about, you gave him back. You didn't bring him back to Vietnam. You didn't put him in some foster care. You're talking about a family who was very much interested in welcoming him in and having their hand at something that was a really big deal.
Well, and they saw our family falling apart.
Right.
And his new mom actually came to me one time and she said, you know, you're going to lose your other kids as well if you don't do something.
Right.
You know, they're going to be gone the minute they're 18 if you don't do something.
Right.
And your marriage isn't going to make it, and you're not going to. You do see this, right?
And did you see it right away, or did it
I had been
take a while to sink in?
I had been scared. I had been living in fear and anxiety and depression and sleeplessness since 2000, end of 2000. And I was screaming for help. But the way that this attachment thing looks, you know, we can talk about that on another day, but basically is the mom looks angry and crazy and frustrated because the child acts differently at home. And the reason they act differently, this is not because they're evil children.
Right.
This is not because they're heartless, horrible people. Not at all. It's because they're traumatized.
Yeah.
And so love feels scary to them. Love has sometimes been hurtful. They don't get it, and they will protect themselves with their lives. And so mom is the one who's trying to nurture and get close. And so they're going to, every time they feel close to mom or they feel that, it feels like a threat. Yeah. It's terrifying. And so they will do what we call distancing behaviors. Right. They'll do something to shove mom away, to get her to back off. And so there's this constant push-pull. And I didn't understand it enough. I had done some research, but I didn't understand it enough. And when you're living in that constant chaos that's 24/7, and your nerves are fried, and your emotions are rattled, and you're not sleeping, and you're on meds, and you're shaken all the time, and you can't get a break ever, and no one understands, there's not a lot of time to research this and figure it out any better.
Right.
And so I didn't do, I couldn't. I did the best that I could.
Right.
It wasn't enough for me to understand that this was not about me, how to parent a trauma. I needed to go into this with better resources.
Yes.
And I didn't have them.
So when did you really start considering relinquishing?
Well, it wasn't
like
until
taking
it was
seriously, not the thoughts of like, maybe, what if, when did it become something substantial that was...
After he had been in their home, actually. He had been with them on weekends for a little bit of time, and then I could tell he was really struggling every time he came back. He'd do pretty good over there, but then his behavior would really escalate. And I was thinking, you know, he doesn't have a clue what's going on. He's getting scared. It's triggering him all over the place. When he comes home, then my anxiety spikes, and we're playing off each other, and it was just becoming crazier and crazier. And he was doing better over there. And we kept thinking, well, maybe if we just had some respite, well, maybe if they just took him for a couple months, or maybe if all these thoughts, but he was doing well there. And it kind of started feeling like every time we brought him home, that was almost more torture for him than just staying there.
Right.
And so we ended up talking with the other couple, and my husband and I, we were not on the same page. It was a very, very difficult time. He just could not see doing this. You just don't do this.
Right.
And yet it was happening.
This goes against the culture.
This goes against everything you know to be true.
Sure.
And so...
but, you know, in some different perspective, I'll share with you, you know, I grew up in a commune. in a 70s commune, hippie, Jesus movement. I was raised by a lot of different mothers and fathers, and we took care of each other's kids, and that was the way of life. And sometimes, if my mom and I weren't seeing eye to eye, another mother would come in and help things. Like that used to be the way we lived, in community together,
Right.
where someone's weak, another person's strong, and instead of judging each other for that, we actually just come alongside each other.
Well, when we got together with this other family and we had dinner and we were talking about this is where it's going, and they were kind of just waiting for the time because they were ready. And they could see he was ready, and it was actually causing almost more harm, pulling him back and forth.
Sure.
And we finally got together and we sat there and talked about it, and she looked at me and she said, this is going to be messy. This is not going to be your neat little tidy box with the ribbon on top and everybody goes, oh, didn't that work out perfectly?
Right.
And they said to us, we never could have done what you did for those 8 years. You got him out. You brought him home. You got him stable.
Yeah.
You taught him what a family is. You got him through school. I said, we couldn't have done that those 8 years, but we can take the next 8. We can do this. You're tired. Your family needs to heal.
Yeah.
We've got the energy. We've got the strength. We can do this.
Yeah.
She said, it's gonna take a village. Some kids, they just have been so deeply wounded that it may take more than one family.
Right.
And I know they love him.
Yeah. Right.
It's not what we wanted.
Right. But you also did what you were called to do. And for the time that you had with him, you did all you could. And sometimes it's coming to that point of realizing, I did my best.
Yeah.
I did what I could do,
and
what I was capable of.
Since that time, I have, I share this in the book and in the talks that I do, and I don't always cry when I'm speaking. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. It kind of depends on how the audience is reacting with me, when I'm speaking or whatever. And sometimes I can make it all the way through, and sometimes I just can't.
Sure.
It's still painful. But I have heard God many times since then just speak very gently in my heart, saying, you've done what I asked. Well done, good and faithful servant. And it's time for you to rest and for you to heal, and I've got him. He's my child, and I will do with him what he needs.
Right.
And
Doesn't
even
that
though nobody
change your
understands,
whole perspective, though, of relinquishing? Doesn't that change the whole legality of it? When we legally, sure, but spiritually, he was never ours.
No.
None of our children are ours. They're all his.
And the thing is, he is still my son in my heart. He's not my son by name. He's not my son in my family, but he is my son in my heart.
Right.
And I love him like a mom.
Yeah.
And, I believe at some point, God redeems things. He works things in circles, in cycles. And when he's ready, when he wants to heal this, if he ever does, it's going to be up to him. I'm not going to invade on his life anymore.
Right.
I came to the realization that for him to make it in this world, I needed to step out. He could not make it in this world with me in his life.
Yeah.
Whatever that triggered in him, he wasn't going to make it, and I wasn't going to make it. So if and when he ever decides, I will be here, and I'm a much stronger person now. I've healed. Yes. I'm not on any meds anymore. I've gone through so much more therapy and dealt with my own trauma of going through all of this, because we've recognized our family has struggled with PTSD. They call it secondary PTSD from having lived with a traumatized child.
Yeah.
It's traumatizing to the rest of us.
Absolutely.
So we're all still healing. And, my hope is just that, first of all, this book would be there for other families going through something similar so that you don't feel like you're alone.
Yeah.
Second, that it would help educate those who want to help wounded children so that they go in with their eyes wide open and know that they have the skills and the tools to deal with these kids so that they don't end up breaking up another family, because that's not what you want.
Right.
My next hope is that pastors will provide resources after adoption and through foster care and with any other parents that are dealing with traumatized children. Please bring in some resources, provide respite, give help with education.
Yeah.
Don't just encourage people to go out and adopt or foster or whatever without giving the resources.
So are there communities now? Have you found and discovered, I mean, after, what you've been through is a different season, a different chapter now, but is there resources now for families who are going through this?
There are some that I'm finding, and I haven't figured out which ones are necessarily the most effective. I do have some resources in the back of the book, and so I would recommend that definitely. The foreword in my book was written by Forrest Lean, who you've met and we've interviewed on the podcast to help people understand what attachment issues are.
And I love that about your book, because that is the beginning. Before you go into the story, before you really hear what you have to say about your experience, you show people and tell people what attachment disorder is, what it means, what it looks like. Here's some scenarios. And it was so helpful for me to read that first so that I went into your story with an understanding. And I also want to tell you, you never know the full measure of your words. And another aspect of your book that is reaching people, because it reached me and my husband, in the sense that when I met Mike, I had a daughter and he had a daughter. It was not his biological daughter. It was a woman he dated for 7 years and met the daughter when she was 2. And here she is, 8, 9 years old. And she calls him dad. She's all she knows of a dad. And we got married, and I thought we were blending these families, and it was horrible. It was torture. Me and the mother did not get along. There was a lot of issues there, and couldn't work it out. And because of that, the daughter was suffering. And because of that, our brand new family and our brand new marriage was suffering. And it was the most painful first year of any, that should be your honeymoon year, your first year together. And it wasn't. It was painful and hard. And since then, I think 5 years into the marriage, he had to let her go. He had to release that relationship because our family was falling apart because of it. And, there wasn't any legalities to let go of, but it was still a heart issue. And he struggled with that because, yes, because he's like, what else could I have done? Oh, I've released this girl who doesn't have it now. Who's she, and all of these things. And the Lord said to him, you were there for that season and you did good. Now you're here. And this is where I want you.
Well, and
that was so
doesn't
powerful.
Always look the way that we think it's going to look.
Exactly.
And, I think that another message I would just like to say is for those of you who know families who are struggling, please just, before you judge, before you step in and start speaking your words of wisdom, try to understand a little bit first, because some of them are going through things that you may never understand. And I'm hoping that my book will help. I've had several people email me saying, I'm going to give this to my family. They're family. They don't understand. I'm going to give this to the kids' teachers. I'm going to give this to their therapists, because sometimes they're going to therapists who don't understand attachment issues. They think they do, but they don't. And so that's my hope, is that this book will first help those parents, second help their families and their sphere of influence. But truly, I see this as a global thing, because attachment is key. Trauma is happening all over the world right now, and we need to know how to heal up from trauma, how to attach kids better. And we need to know as a society what happens when we don't. And what to do about this. So that's my hope, but we'll see where it goes.
It's such an amazing story. And it does end in hopeful, because here you are, your marriage is tell us now, like, because of this, what's your end?
I would say we're certainly not
you?
perfect.
Yeah.
But what I'm discovering, and Forrest talked about this, he said these kids can actually be a blessing if you are willing to let it open up those broken places in you so that you can be healed. And a lot of this stuff has brought up a lot of things from both of us, from our pasts, from our marriage together, from our family. And we've had to deal with it. Yeah. And so it's becoming more and more real. It's becoming more and more authentic. It's not pain-free, but it's becoming more and more real and authentic. And that's what I wanted from day one, was this intimacy. So it's becoming, it's still becoming. It's been 5 years. It's going to take some time, but it's becoming. And I'm excited about that.
Oh, I am too. So, I love it.
Well, thank you so much for
thank you. No, I have to do the closing. I have to do the closing now.
Go.
Thank you so much for coming.
Well, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
I love it. I love that it's time to talk about your story, because you interview such great people and you're so interested in getting their stories out to help other people, but you have a story too, and you've written it, and I love it. So where can people find the book?
Well, the book, Relinquished, When Love Means Letting Go. It's available on Amazon. It's in paperback, and it's also in an e-version, and we're looking at doing an audio version as well at some point. You can also, if you'd like a signed copy, just go to carrieotoole.com and go to the store page, and you can get it there, and it'll come through my website, and I'll autograph a copy for you and send it to you. So awesome. Whichever way, through carrieotoole.com or on Amazon. Awesome. Or if you live local, call me up and have coffee, and I'll bring you one.
Totally.
That works too. So,
yay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet.
You can close it out.
We'll see you next time here on Broken and Brilliant.